Hey everyone, it's Bob. Welcome back to Elevate Your AIQ. Today I'm joined by Natasha Nuytten, CEO of Clara, for a powerful conversation about talent, opportunity, and how we can build fairer, more human hiring systems with the help of AI. Natasha shares the personal story behind Clara's mission and how the platform is rethinking how we evaluate potential, going beyond job titles and resumes to look at things like learning agility, critical thinking, and what Natasha calls distance traveled, which I'll let her explain. We also dig into one of the more timely topics in hiring. When is it appropriate to use AI in interviews as a candidate and as a company? This episode explores the intersection of ethics, equity, and innovation. And it's a must listen for anyone thinking about how we design systems that truly see people for what they're capable of. Let's go hear from Natasha. As always, thanks for listening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I am your host, Bob Pulver. With me today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Natasha Nuytten from Clara. How are you today, Natasha?
I'm awesome. How are you today?
I am doing great.
Good.
Thank you so much for being here and spending time with me and my audience.
Yeah, right on. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Likewise. So, just to kick things off, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to Clara?
How I landed here.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? I zigged and zagged all over the place, which is actually part of our inception story as a company. But I don't know how far you want to go back, but a few little things about me. I was born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to a Jamaican and a Belgian, of all things, that met in the 70s at a nightclub. So, envision the whole matching outfits, the whole scene. It was a real situation. But I think what's unique about that is like their stories and how they landed where they are was so influential in how I grew up and the paths that they took thereafter. So I was raised just by my mom, and I share that because she was so awesome and so strong. And I just was surrounded by these really incredible women in my life. And so I played a big role in my story and how I landed here. We had some rules in our family, and they were work hard, family first, and don't be an a-hole, like those were like the kind of things that we hung on to, like be a good person, and had a great childhood. We had not a lot, like we were pretty poor actually, but man, so good. My family was so loving, and got to play like both in the city and in the farm, and do all the things, and just really lucky. That said, though, Sioux Falls was never my place. That was never where I was going to stay, and I got out as soon as I could. And my mom had one rule. She said, "You can go anywhere you want to college, as long as you live within 3-hour driving distance of someone I know." And I thought, well, I mean, that can't be too hard, right? Except everyone she knew was like a pretty small group of humans that didn't live near where I lived. But I ended up in Texas and went there for a year. And I share that because that was the first time that anyone in my world didn't think I could do the things that I thought I could do. And that was pretty formative for me. It stuck with me all these, God, I haven't been in undergrad in 30 years now. But, point being, it was pretty formative. So I moved around a lot. I lived in the Midwest. I lived overseas. I lived out in the Northwest. And I think the through line for my career and the things that I've worked with mentoring and family work and grassroots policy advocacy kind of stuff, drug and alcohol prevention education for kids when I was younger, and then ran an e-com business. I got into marketing, and I was part of running an e-com business, I should say. It was not my business, and had a great team. But then we started a few businesses, and I found that I really enjoyed just doing hard things. And like I said, I zigged and I zagged. I ran a table tennis company. I've been all over the map, but all of the through lines have been really, as I was saying, the foundations for our business, for Clara. And that is that I figured I could do it if somebody just gave me an opportunity to figure it out. And that sort of self-efficacy was really important because as I believed in myself, people around me believed in me. And that was a really, really critical factor. So I met the co-founders of the company. Kenny Williams was a baseball player and former Major League Baseball executive for a bazillion years. Don't blame the White Sox on him now, but he did win a World Series there. And his wife, Zoraida Samblin, was actually one of the first people to be on two major networks. She was on both CNN, and then she was on both Telemundo and CBS Morning News. Like, that's we're all people that came from places where that shouldn't be where we ended up. And the through line was that someone saw something in us and gave us a shot at a thing. And so as we met and decided to explore this idea that they had, it was their notion, and just asked me to kind of weigh in on it. What we all aligned on is that there is a significant difference between what we can do and what people sometimes give us the opportunity to do. And how do we help people not only get those opportunities, but then know how to leverage them and do something with them? So that's how I landed here. That's how we got to be Clara.
Wow. So many things to unpack there. I now have a better appreciation for, the perspective that you bring, the obstacles that so many people have to overcome, putting themselves in the right position, understanding where their strengths are, building a support system, things of that nature. I'm really intrigued by the table tennis company.
That was a good time. Yeah.
We play that pretty often in my house. So talk a little bit about Clara and the focus that you have in the talent space, because I definitely, as you know, with the theme of this show around responsible AI and fairness and being human centric, Clara seems quite well aligned with that. So I just thought you could just unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me the chance to do it. So, as I said, I mean, one of the reasons we started the company was because we didn't feel like people were being seen for what they were capable of. And when you think about a resume, we've all applied for jobs, right? Well, most of us. And when you start to write a resume, A, it's hard to tell what you really can do. And B, I don't know, I think a resume is really a reflection of what somebody else thought I could do, not what I'm actually capable of. It's like what they were willing to hire me to do. And the miss there for us is that we are so much more than the job titles that we've had and the responsibilities that we've been given. And so we really wanted to, how can we help people tell their own stories better, but also help the folks on the other side, the talent acquisition people and the recruiters? How can we help them see more and get more information so they can find those things that are really the value add that makes our team so dynamic? And so the way that we approach that is and this was, we started building this company a couple years ago before AI exploded right before the end of 2023. It was around, but it was fairly new, which has been great. And we can kind of dig into that transition too. But we really wanted to figure out how can we bring both of those parties together in a smarter, more thoughtful way with intention. And so Clara is really human-centric AI platform that allows talent acquisition teams and HR folks to find talent faster and move more efficiently in their businesses, which is important. But it also provides a better candidate experience by giving them real-time feedback about the materials they're submitting and giving them a shot to say a little bit more about what they're capable of and who they are. So,
And this is for any particular industries, or knowledge work versus high volume hiring, and where exactly within like the funnel would this sit?
yeah, great question. So we sort of sit in this space between sourcing and we're in screening, right? Like we're in that space. And we sit on the front end of it because we integrate with ATSs. So we fit into that stack. We also do have a standalone platform for those companies, 3 million of which in this country don't have ATSs. And we really try to think about how do we help people match up the talent. So when people apply, we take their materials balanced against a job description, ask some questions back to the candidate in real time, and giving them an opportunity. It might say, hey, you're missing this particular skill, or you haven't really spoken about this, that, or the other thing. Can you give us a little bit more? We also then give the employer the opportunity to really create a sort of equitable screening in that they ask all the candidates the same questions. So they can set what those questions are either at a global level or at the job level specific to the skills that they need. And then we have a proprietary assessment that can be, we recommend it being given to every candidate as they're walking through the door. Some of our partners do control that a little bit and turn it on later. But the idea is that it's an assessment that looks at critical thinking, learning agility, and what we call distance traveled. And I share those because critical thinking is obviously important, right? And becomes more so as we're inundated with information every day. Learning agility, especially as related to this topic of AI, is increasingly important because the world's changing very, very rapidly. So even if people have a particular skill set, being able to take old information and apply it in new situations, or take new information and apply it in familiar situations and readjust one's thinking becomes more and more important. And when we can hire for that, we're able to hire a more agile workforce. I mean, that makes teams more dynamic. And then we look at, as I said, what we call distance traveled. And that's a fairly newer concept. It's been being written about for approximately the last 20-ish years, but really more widely sort of accepted in the last 5 to 10. In the last few years, we've seen, as recently as last year, Adam Grant out of the Wharton Business School wrote a book called Hidden Potential. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, I think you have. It is a fantastic book that really talks about, potential and success should really be defined relative to one's starting place to where they land. And so we kind of took that concept and looked at all the research and divided out what the sort of aspects were of it, and created an assessment around being able to measure things like grit and resourcefulness and self-efficacy and anti-fragility and those types of things. And so that set of questions can also be rolled in. So why we find that to be really important is that it helps teams filter in talent that they're missing, right? They can find people who are quick learners and have a lot of hustle. And it helps people who are applying for jobs say, hey, yeah, maybe I haven't done that, but I am capable of doing that, and to evidence that.
I guess the distance traveled is, well, I guess we take it literally. Like, this is, look at how far I've come, but it's also, there's an aspect to that is in terms of assessing someone's potential and sort of how much further they have to go and mapping out. I guess it ties back to the learning agility. If they're exhibiting that, and they have this sort of, I guess, yet to be fulfilled kind of potential, you start to focus in on, they can easily, fill that gap, or how do you?
What if I told you that your boss skydives, Tim in marketing is a magician, and Sam in accounting does sums in his head while standing on his hands? Seeing sides of the people you work with but never see, sides that inform and inspire their work and that can inspire yours, is what The Talent Show is all about. Email me, Tom Alexander, host of The Talent Show, at talentshow@backboneinc.com, and show us what you got. I look forward to seeing you on The Talent Show.
So that's future state. That's great, though. I love it. Yeah, that's great. And that is a yes for us. In a couple of years, that'll be where we are. We're working on that now. But so how we think about it is, when we think about, there are skills, like, we want to be realistic about the fact that you have to hire someone who can do the job, right? And so we really want to be thoughtful about the skills that people have. And when we look at current systems and tools, most ATSs, even Boolean searches, will look at keywords, right? But they don't look at context or language. And so we use something called I call, my team makes fun of me, the baking soda concept, right? If I'm out of baking soda, I can Google that, and it will tell me what other 6 things in my refrigerator or cupboard I should use. And we do that with skills. And so when we think about, for instance, someone who's coding, maybe they don't have a particular language in which they code, but there's an adjacent language that's really close, and they're a very agile learner, right? So the opportunity for them to make that switch pretty quickly, if they have all the other things that you need and they'd be a great value add, is it worth the investment to say, hey, this is the person we want to hire here because, man, that's a great catch. Somebody else isn't going to see that, right? And we can get it. You asked me, sorry, earlier about industry and like where we see this sitting. And we've seen it used in both the sort of at both mid and senior level sort of white collar work, but we've also seen it in knowledge workers. And the other thing though is that we're seeing when we're talking about people who are using their hands and they're very skill based, that a lot of times people are hiring for not necessarily hiring for what that person might do next. And so the assessment is very helpful to say, hey, this person actually has some aptitude around, you know, this critical thinking. Like they might be someone that you'd want to keep an eye on as far as like maybe they're a great problem solver and we can kind of put them in this slightly niche role or give them this particular set of responsibilities or look at them for, management or some other type of thing. So you kind of get an idea of where they're going to go. To your point, then doing some skill mapping and career pathing for us down the road.
Yeah, no, I think that would be incredible. And you're right. I think you're ahead of anyone who's basically doing keyword, matching, because if you can do the baking soda method, but just the skills adjacencies are really important because otherwise you're going to overlook somebody who could easily pick up, a related, programming, language or related skill in 2 months. You're going to not hire this person just because it's going to take them 2 months to, learn that new skill. I mean, the job is going to evolve, right? The work is going to evolve. And so you need someone who is sort of malleable in a way to roll with that. Otherwise you're going to be looking again and you're going to be looking for what else this person can do. Otherwise, sorry, we just don't have a place for you here anymore or something. So
No, nobody does want that. And when you think about like our jobs, each of us, right? Think about the role that you started with and how it evolves as you are in a company. And we take roles so that we learn skills and become better and progress anyway. Like that's a natural evolution. So if we can see that someone has the potential to do that, why wouldn't we hire for someone who's got that potential? Like it just seems like a no-brainer.
yeah, you talked about critical thinking before, and lately I've seen some concerning headlines and conversations around that topic. So I just thought I'd probe you a little bit in that. When we look at like World Economic Forum data and, in my opinion, use some common sense, that seems like a human, attribute that we should be seeking and encouraging and, sort of upskilling people around. And what I'm seeing lately is two things. One is people experimenting with AI that they believe is exhibiting human level critical thinking, which I haven't dug into the research to know if there's any validity to that or not. The other equally concerning situation is when candidates or students are just overtly outsourcing their critical thinking to an AI. And I actually got into a debate just the other day on LinkedIn where surprisingly a founder in the talent acquisition space was defending candidates' use of AI, not in prep for the interview, but in the middle of a one-on-one video interview. They had a second screen listening to the conversation, taking a full transcribing the conversation, but also prompting with exact sentences to use in response. So maybe this is just people that are really not good at interviewing and they just want to get to the next stage. But the defense was to the effect of they're being resourceful and they're going to use AI when they get on the job anyway. So Why is this a problem? And so my take is going back to the human centricity topic. Can two people not have a conversation without engaging? If you were having if this was an interview over coffee, would you look to your phone to get the answers? I think people have lost their minds. I think it, you're you're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. That's my take. I was curious to get yours.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic scenario to have in this conversation because I think that there's validity on both sides of that argument. On the one hand, we need to hold on to the things that humans do best, right? And that's the human part of being a human. It's the connection, it's the context and those types of things. And that's something I'm working on in my life, holding two things that feel completely opposite as equally true. And technology is changing so quickly that the people who use it will win and it will evolve. And the people who choose not to, they'll win in a different way, but it will be in a different way. And so what we need to be really thoughtful and intentional about is, to your point, can't two people have a conversation? There needs to be the ability to do both, right? And I think the person making the argument that they're going to use AI in their work, and if that's what they're doing in a call, you can't expect that they're not going to do it on the job. So you can't be mad about it. And that's not going to work in every scenario. And so as human beings, we need to be really thoughtful about what we offload and what we keep, right? Like, you think about, I still remember my childhood phone number, right? 605-335-7533. Like, I hope I don't have you. I mean, whoever you just called, tell them I said, hello, this is my, my child at home. However, I mean, it took me, I think, 3 months to remember, my partner's phone number when we first started dating, because it was in my phone. And yet, what it did do was when we can offload some of those tasks, it frees up space for more of that human creativity. So where we sit, and I think this is where the rub is in that conversation, is, are we at the place where having a conversation with another person is what we need to offload? And the reality is, like, part of that is a values debate. And part of it is, I think that it is a reality that both of those things are true. There are going to be people who, I think about traveling. I love to travel and my language skills are garbage. Even in English, sometimes they're not so great, right? If I can use technology to have a real-time conversation with someone when I think I've said the chicken's good, but I really just peed in someone's Cheerios in French, right? So that is an amazing opportunity for us to use AI and having a human-to-human conversation where it really actually facilitates that. I think too about, and that's one travel example, right? Like in the work world, I think about folks who maybe are neurodivergent and not as great at subtlety in conversation. Is there not a world in which that AI language model might help them be more empathetic or more well received? Because sometimes the issue is on the part of the recipient, right? Not the giver. So I do think that you're right. Humans need to be able to human. And on the other side of that, we do all over each other all the time without permission. But the reality is that some of these things are going to change. And so I do think we need to be really thoughtful about, is it the right time to pass this thing off? And if so, how are we doing it? And then what space are we freeing up in our brains instead? And how are we being better people because we are offloading this? And are we being better people? I think those are checkpoints.
I'm glad you brought up the neurodiversity example because that's the exact sort of exception that I cited, calling out. The conversation was sort of ongoing on someone's post, and there was a video showing the demo of this working. And so that's what I called out specifically. I said, no one has suggested that this is for like an accommodation kind of scenario where someone may not be great at contact. They may not be great at, just on the spot, coming up with a fluid answer to a particular question. And they just need, instead of taking, this long dramatic pause or, looking away for, awkwardly or whatever, it could help them just sort of, zone in and just be just a little bit more crisp. But I also feel like, otherwise you're sort of taking advantage of this scenario that this person can't see that you're looking at this other screen. And there's a transparency issue and a trust issue that's bi-directional, right? Like it shouldn't have to be explicitly stated, but I don't know, maybe it does need to be explicitly stated. This is our expectations about the use of technology through this process. And I also think that there are situations where, if the recruiter is using AI in the middle of an interview, and I don't mean just like a recording that's going to get filed away. I mean, maybe it's, you alluded to it before, I think, Natasha, where you said like, there's a topic we have yet to cover that we think should be on the checklist of things to cover in this call. I think in a recruiter phone screen, I mean, frankly, I think giving more people opportunity to go past the resume, which I can't stand the resume. So I'm happy to provide, and support any solution that can get to know the candidate a little bit better. But I'm bullish on, AI conducting that interview. And if you've got an AI asking the questions of the candidate, then maybe it's okay to level the playing field and have the candidate be able to, have something. I don't know. I need to think a little bit more about that, but I'd rather as a candidate, I'd rather talk to an AI who's asking totally appropriate, normal questions than get ghosted or rely solely on my resume. I mean, what's the downside? You're actually going to get feedback right? And instead of just being completely in the dark and not knowing, what went wrong. So to me, that there's nowhere to go but up from the current, situation. You're either going to get weeded out or you're going to get ghosted or whatever. But even if you had a human being doing the recruiter phone screen as that initial touch point, it's not necessarily that that's a relationship that needs to be nurtured. You may never, depending on the size of the organization, you may never see or hear from that person ever again. But my understanding of the example that they cited was this was I don't know if it was an interview with the hiring manager, but it was definitely a human to human on video, and only one person was using AI, and that was the candidate. And it just seemed like it was not the appropriate method or time to sort of augment, your own thinking, because for all we know, you literally had no answer of your own for that question. But, or maybe you had one, but it was going to be like completely just, yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a reason that, you can't, cork your bat or use an aluminum bat in baseball. And there's a reason that we have rules, and I don't know, it's just, I'm trying to be open-minded. There are scenarios where it does make sense. I don't know. I want to see us moving in a constructive direction, and I want to see us using AI in appropriate ways. And it just seems like, that I don't want to see I don't want to see the disparity between the haves and the have-nots get worse.
There's a lot of things that you said there. I want to pull in a couple of threads or at least make a couple of points. And one would be, the point around transparency, right? And if you know that I'm using the tool and I've agreed that that's okay, or vice versa, I think that establishes, a shared sort of agreement, a shared space. And I think that companies need to be really thoughtful about that. So, for instance, you know, candidates have to opt in to having, the AI evaluate any of their responses, right? Those types of things. I think second, if a company especially is going to be using AI in those hiring processes, they need to be very transparent about that, but they also need to be very thoughtful and put security place measures in place that protect that person's information. Because if I'm just recording it on Firefly or whatever, let's take Firefly out of it. If I'm just recording that and that is going into a large language model where I've not given my permission, then that's my personal information that you've just thrown out into the wind, right? And that's not okay. So there needs to be the parameters around it. I think to your point, it's one of the reasons why the whole conversation around how AI is used, especially in talent acquisition, needs to be so carefully thought through, because the reality is great tools in the hands of great people do great things. Great tools in the hands of nefarious folks can also do really great and terrible things. We've seen that, right? We're seeing that play out on the world stage right now. And so we need to be really thoughtful about we how we use the tools, but people are going to use them, right? And so they're not going away. And both the magic and the sort of terrible beauty of the thing is that it is going to allow us to not only do what we do now better, faster, etc. It is going to allow us to do things we didn't even think about doing. In the same way that telephones, like no one thought we were going to be using a telephone in our pocket in the middle of a jungle to call somebody, like no one thought that. No one thought that in a country like India, where people are living in serious poverty, like the one thing they have is a mobile telephone, right? As a part of their way to bank and communicate with their family and friends. So I do think we need to, while I'm with you, that there are these spaces where we have to think about, is that something we're ready to hand off? We have to expect that it is going to start doing all of the things. So what that frees us up to do is figure out, it's that like in the middle is the solid space where we know this technology can work and work well and wisely. And then there's this crazy amoeba all over around it that humans can do. And you kind of have to find the Venn diagram where they overlap. And for right now, we need to think about staying in the lines, right? Like where we know that it can do things well. And we have to do that especially with thought and intention in talent acquisition and human resources. And we need to start thinking forward and being prepared that it's going to start scooching out into those weird little amoeba spaces. And we need to be really thoughtful about whether or not we're ready to go there. An example would be like, video interviewing tools, right? That is going to be something that happens down the road, right? Right now, those technologies, they have a few too many biases, some are really great. I'm not calling out anybody here, but just acknowledging that there are these spaces and there's always that frontier is always a little bit sketchy, right? Like you always have to, use your critical thinking skills to decide if it's the right technology for you or not.
Yeah, and I hope I was clear that I wasn't calling out the company itself, because I went to their website, I did my research, I looked at the platform, I looked at the capabilities, and there's a lot of good stuff there. I mean, I've spent time in the assessment space, I've spent time in the interview intelligence kind of space, and I appreciate the pre-interview capabilities, helping you get prepared for an interview, you know, role playing and, answers to tough questions and evaluating, your responses and things like that, both text based and I think even video, although I'm not sure what it was analyzing with the video, but and then the post interview stuff where you take the transcription, it gives you some feedback or whatever. But of course, to get to post, it's got to be listening and doing all the mid interview features. And I had no issue with the real time transcription either, as long as you have permission from the employer to do that. So again, like you said, going back to the transparency and trust, et cetera. But so it was the one, capability mid interview that said, we'll be listening and we'll be able to help you and prompt you to give a good quality response to specific questions. So it was that piece in particular that I took issue with without understanding a little bit more. And then it was also interesting that they had a decent amount of funding from at least 6 different sources, angel and VC. So either they saw the bigger picture and where the potential went, even if you were to take that piece out. But again, some people are taking the other side that says we're trying to level the playing field here. This is not an easy process to go through, and technology is advancing to help both sides of the matching, and we've got to make adjustments for it. I just want to make sure we're doing so in an ethical and appropriate way, and also I think about just AI literacy and readiness and using it when appropriate. And my daughter's in high school, and I'm hearing about kids who are trying to use AI to basically write their college essays and get answers to their homework instead of using it as a tutor and a coach to analyze your thought process and how are you actually problem solving, right? Because it's one thing to use AI and other internet search tools or whatever so that you don't have to like memorize information, but just in terms of like relationships and using our brains, so our brains don't atrophy, and that learning mindset just seems counter to outsourcing some of these things around critical thinking. If there's a topic you actually don't know about, then it's great to learn about it, but you shouldn't, if you don't actually know the answer, if you're giving one that you didn't come up with, there's a degree of misrepresentation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I actually we had an interesting call with potential partner of ours, and they're in tech. And so they still have to do like hard skill assessments. And I think that's great because, to your point, people could use this technology in a situation in which they're applying for a role or attempting to get a job in which they wouldn't be able to do that in real time. So I think that's one of the considerations for me. So when we think about, we've had a lot of people say, well, how do you know, we're getting all these AI resumes, like people are just one click apply. Like if we're starting there, right? Like how do we know what they're capable of doing? And one of the things that we've done is you can't, like someone couldn't respond. They'd have to be responding in real time. Now, it doesn't mean that they couldn't ask AI, but like with the assessment, it's a sort of multiple choice question, right? So there's a little bit of a check and balance. But what I like about some of the questions that you've been asking about this scenario is there needs to be consideration for the actual role and the actual responsibilities that that person is going to have to do. So, for instance, if I don't, and this is on HR and talent acquisition to think about how they're hiring. If writing is not a primary part of the job that I am going to be doing for you, first of all, don't ask me questions that require me to be an exceptional writer. Like, that's not my jam. But second, why not have space for that so that we can get at the actual piece of the work that you need to understand, right? Now, that's just one example. Again, this sort of technical skills that we were talking about with this company, they do that test in real time, and it's sort of tested and gated so that they can make sure somebody isn't getting their answers, off of the internet, because for them, that's a critical piece. But when they look at the responses that they give, they're like, I mean, it's great if they can give a really nice response, but if they don't have to talk to customers and they don't have to interact with people.
Are you tired of talent and HR podcasts that sound like corporate training videos? Same. Talentless is the no-fluff show about hiring, leadership, culture, and what's actually going on in the world of work. Talentless is a podcast for recruiters by recruiters. Hosted by Desiree Goldie and Ashley King, they're smart, occasionally salty, and never afraid to say what everyone else is thinking. Listen wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe at talentlesspodcast.com.
That's not so important to me. So a little bit of it is upon us to be thoughtful about the types of questions we're asking people to use and how and when we're asking them or giving them freedom to use technologies. And then again, 100% always just being transparent about it and being ethical about the way that it's being used, because it can level the playing field for a lot of folks. And we need to make sure, to your point that you were making earlier, that the gap doesn't get bigger because we're refusing to allow people to use these tools, right? So we have to sort of help them to the point of what we were talking about, getting opportunities, but knowing how to leverage them. So it is educational. Companies need to take ownership in training their teams and their people internally. Like, that's a whole other conversation, right, around talent development and ownership. But
yeah, no, that's another piece that I think about a lot as well. And it's not just for talent and HR folks, although the ramifications are perhaps a little bit more significant there, just because you're making decisions for and about people and their livelihood. I mean, that's why in the EU, for example, in the EU AI Act, as you probably know, I mean, they've already, the one piece of the legislation that is now in effect as of this month, February 2025, as AI literacy. Like, if you're using it, you have to show us somehow. I forget the exact specifics of how you're supposed to demonstrate this, but you're supposed to have validated that you have trained your people on how to use it and use it properly. And so anything within talent is likely considered, one of those high risk use cases. So I just, if you're going to be proactive and stay ahead of that, regardless of where you're based, you should think about, what that means, and responsible design as well as responsible use. So I know you think about both of those things as a solution provider, and so yeah, those are some things that I think about, and I think about the the upskilling and sort of AI literacy that I went through when I was back at IBM, way before generative AI. There was IBM Watson was our then sort of poster child for AI at the time, but the average person up in Fishkill manufacturing plant, or people making microchips and other things, like I didn't know what that meant. We're a cognitive computing company now. Well, what the hell does that mean, right? So teach them how this came to be. Advancements in AI plus big data plus cloud computing. Apply cybersecurity on top of that. Apply data privacy on top of that. And hey, functionally, look at what this can do. Well, this can do speech to text, text to speech. This can see what's on your plate, tell you how many calories are in your meal, and it can
hot dog, not hot dog.
What? Yeah, right. Cat, not cat.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, part of this is opening people's eyes to what's possible, and so I guess I'm just anxious to see people solving bigger things than just automating things with it and using it in ways that don't solve a real problem. I'm all for shortcutting things where it makes sense and where it's, ethical and appropriate to do so. Nobody wants all that, grunt work, and there's a lot that can be done, but I want it to help us, make better decisions in, whether that's an individual context or a team setting or, for a big company. And so I think about some of that I'd like to see more companies do. And I think about what else could people learn and work on once you do get rid of some of that routine things, and once you do, automate some of the things that nobody really wants to do. They do it because they need to do it, and it's part of everybody's job to an extent.
Yeah. And that's the magic of technology, right? Is as it gets better and it helps us do those day-to-day things, it opens up that space for us to be creative and do the things that we've never thought about doing. We can start to imagine the possibilities. But I do think it's really important that, you know, it is taken out of the black box, right? That we are able to manipulate it as the humans who are the ones impacted by it or using it, that we're able to, you know, apply it equally to everybody. So it's not like, if you change one thing, it only applies to the folks who have come after. It needs to apply to all the folks who were there before. So I think that there are some of those hard questions. And very, very frankly, I think one of the harder parts for me about why right now this is difficult is because I think in particular in the United States, we are collectively trying to sort of level set, come to a reckoning with some of our inadequacies or mistakes. And my one fear, well, not my one fear, maybe my biggest, is that if we don't take the opportunity specifically with this technology, AI, we're just at this sort of tipping point where if we don't think about this from an equity perspective, we will not only repeat the mistakes of the past that we've created and made systemic in a lot of situations, but we will amplify them because the technology is so much more powerful. So I think that's why it's so important to be having conversations like this for, folks like you to be making sure we're keeping this top of mind, and that ethics and access and equity and accessibility and, equity, applicability and thoughtfulness and transparency are so important, because we have an opportunity to, for the first time, maybe I know somebody's going to think I'm overstating this, but I think the reality is that we do actually have the opportunity to begin to level the playing field in a society where class plays a much bigger role than we've ever acknowledged that it does, where gender plays a bigger role, and where race all of these others, right? This neurodivergence, all of these things, difference, we'll say, plays a bigger role than we've ever given it credit for. And so we have an opportunity to right that, right? And to create a better place for all of those folks to be able to have access, and where everyone wins. And so that's part of a much bigger conversation around how do we stop the zero-sum thinking and, all of those types of things. But I think there is a real opportunity here for us to use this technology in a way that it is creating some of those better moments, but it does have to be thoughtful, and it does have to be intentional. And the people who are using the tools are the ones that have to sort of link arms to sort of demand that is what companies are doing with their technologies.
I think you're exactly right. I have contended for a while that even before, the U.S., the new administration, made some debatable, I'll call it generously, decisions about, fairness diversity. And I just think responsible AI, human-centric AI is how, if we embrace this wave of technology appropriately, and we think about, as one of my podcast guests called it, humanness. If we think about what's best for us as a society, then AI is the way to have the transparency and the ability to level that playing field and to see our past mistakes. The AI isn't. If the AI is exhibiting bias, it's because that's how it was trained by us, right? So if you acknowledge that, then we can take baby steps at least to.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We have, you know, I mean, how many gazillions of data points, at this point that are training these models, and garbage in, garbage out is always true. Yeah. And the reality is that because we know that, right, we can't go back and change history. We can't go back and change what's been written, or the way things maybe have been tweaked. History maybe has been tweaked, we'll call it. But what we can do is add additional information. Find out where are our weaknesses here in our knowledge. Where should we be thinking differently? What did we get wrong? And then how do we acknowledge and correct that? And also train the models to do the same. The fact that it thinks it has to have it early on, sometimes still now, thinks it has to have an answer. So it makes one up instead of just saying, I don't know, right? That's so reflective of us as humans, right? And so we need to be able and willing to take a hard look at our own selves and our own preferences and biases, because the systems we create get exactly the outcomes that we design them to give us. So we need to be thoughtful about how we build this system so that we get the outcomes that we desire to have.
Well said. Love it. Natasha, it has been so nice talking to you again. Thank you so much for spending all this time with me. It was really, really nice and insightful, and just a lot to think about. So thank you again. And I hope we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me a few things to think about too. I appreciate that. And I'm always down for a good conversation. So
excellent.
I like to learn. Yeah. So thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you again. And thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next time.